Hello, welcome to American Baker in Germany. I'm Michelle, and today we are making a Christmas cake. Now, I've been making a lot of cakes lately, and so we don't need another cake. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it on a cake dummy this time. And I'm kind of excited because this is the first time I'm using a cake dummy, and I am going to try on my hand at modeling. I haven't done tons of modeling, so I'm a little bit excited, a little bit nervous, and I really hope it turns out well. Today I am modeling a nativity scene with Mary, Joseph, baby Jesus, a few more Christmas related decorations, a little bit on the spiritual side of Christmas. So let's get started.
I start out covering a piece of cardboard with tinfoil to act as a cake board. Normally this kind of cardboard isn't strong enough to hold up a cake, but it should be fine to hold up a cake dummy. Then I use edible glue to stick down the cake dummy. I started out rolling out some deep blue fondant, but quickly realized that it wouldn't be large enough to cover the whole cake dummy. So I added some darker blue and some lighter blue fondant to give me some more volume. This time when I rolled it out, it was large enough to cover my cake dummy. Just to be sure, I measured. Before placing the blue fondant on the cake dummy, I brushed on some edible glue. Then I used my rolling pin to help me lift up the blue fondant and place it on the cake dummy. I used my fondant smoother and my hands to smooth on the fondant. Then I pressed the corners together and trimmed away the excess with a sharp knife. I pressed the fondant into the cake dummy to make sure I had sharp edges and trimmed away the excess fondant at the corners, spending some time smoothing them over with my fingers. Then I cut the last lip of fondant at the bottom, creating a sharply covered cake. I used the flat part of my knife blade to smooth out the last of the edges. Then I got out all of my fondant modeling tools. I started with flesh-colored fondant. I have a really hard time describing how I did this, so bear with me. I started with the heads, beginning with Mary. I rolled a piece of fondant into a ball and then a rough oval. I pinched one end to make a sharper chin. Using my finger and my cylindrical modeling tool, I pressed a dip into it about halfway up. I pinched a tiny triangle for the nose and used the ball tool to press in eye sockets. I used a sharp modeling tool to make a mouth line and worked the fondant until I was happy with the face. Then I made a couple of small balls of white fondant and placed them into the eye sockets, sticking them on with edible glue. Then I pinched off a tiny piece of flesh-colored fondant and rolled it thin using the edge of a piping tip to cut off a thin piece and pressed it onto the eyes to create eyelids. Then I tried to give her brown eyes, but the eyes were just so tiny that any colored piece I used was just too large. So in the end, I just used a bit of black in the middle to form the pupils. I touched up the face a bit with my modeling tools and used the sharp end of a Dresden tool to give her nostrils. I wasn't completely happy with the eyelids, so I added a bit more flesh-colored fondant to make the eyelids a bit bigger. Then I cut the smallest pinch of black fondant and rolled them into tiny snakes. I pressed them onto the eyes to look like eyelashes. Next, I worked on Joseph's face. I began the same way, except that I didn't make his chin quite as pointed. I pinched a larger nose and used my cylindrical tool to press in where the eyes will go. I used a ball tool to make the eye sockets. I worked the face until I was happy with it. I didn't work on the mouth as much because I knew I wanted to give him a full beard. I added white balls of fondant for eyes, just like Mary. I added nostrils with the tip of the Dresden tool and tiny little black circles for pupils. Then tiny little crescent shapes for eyelids. I didn't put on eyelashes because I wanted to paint them on later. I was pretty happy with my two faces so far. Now for baby Jesus. I got a piece of flesh-colored fondant about half the size of the other two heads. I rolled it into a ball and left it a bit more round than the other two. Just like the others, I pressed in a dent near the middle and pinched a tiny nose into existence. Used a ball tool to make eye sockets, a pointed tool to make a mouth and nostrils. I worked it a bit until I was happy with it. I wanted the baby's eyes to be closed, so I pressed a couple flesh-colored balls of fondant into the eye sockets and left them like that. The size of the head was really good. Now it's time for Mary's body. I debated a bit because she traditionally wears blue, but the cake was already blue, so I made her robe green instead. I rolled it into a thick snake and folded it to look like Mary was kneeling. Now, I've had 2 children with natural birth, so I can attest that she would not have been standing. I can also know that she would still look pregnant. It takes days or sometimes weeks to no longer look heavily pregnant, so I gave her a rounded pregnancy belly. She would also be lactating, so her breasts would be rather round and heavy. At this point, I realized I didn't have any room for shoulders, so I rolled out a snake of green fondant long enough to make the arms and shoulders and laid it over the top. I also formed a neck. I pressed in a line at the elbows and bent the arms. I figured she would be having some afterbirth cramping, so I put both hands on her belly. I made the hands with some flesh-colored fondant in a rough circle shape. I used a knife to cut a mitten shape to form the thumb. Then I cut the fingers apart. I rounded the fingers with my fingertips. I stuck them on the ends of her sleeves with edible glue. I found some of the body a bit out of proportion, so I trimmed off a bit the end where her feet would be, and I cut a line off her back because I found it too thick. I liked it much better afterwards. I used a toothpick stuck up about halfway up the head. Trimmed it to size, and stuck it onto the body. Then I rolled out a piece of green fondant pretty thin, and stuck it on her head and back to be a kind of veil or headcloth. Finally, I started working on the hair. I figured her headcloth would be a bit askew after giving birth. I rolled out a number of thin snakes out of brown fondant. I stuck them on with edible glue. I also tucked some around her neck and onto her shoulders. Then I began working on Joseph. I decided to have Joseph wear gray. And I figured Joseph would probably be standing because he would need to get his little family everything they might need. He's the only one capable of taking care of them right now. So he would be ready to move around. I rolled it onto a cylinder and propped it up. I made his shoulders a bit broader than Mary's. I made 2 snakes to be his sleeves. I creased at the elbows just like Mary and decided I didn't want his hands on his stomach like Mary had. That didn't make sense. I kind of wanted his arm around Mary's shoulders, so I decided to pause here and place the figures onto the cake. I placed his arm on Mary's back. I bent his other arm to touch his heart. I put his head on with a toothpick just like Mary. I made a couple of hands off camera just like I made Mary's and placed them onto Joseph's sleeves. I also cut a couple half circles and put them on the sides of Joseph's head to be ears. Then I wrapped a bit of brown fondant around his neck to act as his full beard. I made a bunch of brown snakes to act as his mustache and locks of hair and stuck them on with edible glue. If you like what we do here, consider subscribing for a new cake video every Monday morning at 7 a.m. Central European Time, as well as regular bonus videos with recipes and baking basics. After his head was covered, I added a couple more locks of hair around the bottom to give some movement to it. I made a couple of very thin snakes and curved them a bit, sticking them on Mary and Joseph to be eyebrows. Then I mixed some yellow and brown fondant together to make a straw color and pressed it down to be the manger. Baby Jesus' body was easy. He was wrapped in swaddling clothes, so I just rolled a cylinder of white fondant and stuck the head onto it. I tucked a few snakes of straw-colored fondant around the manger to look more like straw. I also glued a curl of brown onto the top of the baby's head to be a tiny lock of hair. I used a bit of pink food coloring and mixed it with clear alcohol to make edible paint. Then I painted it onto the mouths of all the figures as well as the cheeks. Then I painted undiluted brown food coloring to make the baby's eyelashes and eyebrows as well as Joseph's eyelashes. Then I realized that I had forgotten the baby's ears. They were so small I had a hard time sticking the ears on, so it took a couple of attempts. Finally, I rolled out some yellow fondant and cut out some stars with cookie cutters and tiny plunger cutters. I put the largest one right under the Holy Family, representing the new star that appeared at the birth of Jesus. Then I placed the rest of the stars around the cake. I am really proud of this one. We won't be eating it until after Christmas. I can sit it out as decoration until then. I learned so much about modeling for this cake. I would love to model some more in the future. Next time I'll make larger figures so everything doesn't have to be quite so tiny, but I really feel like this represents the reason for the season. Jesus Christ is born. It reminds me of the song, O Holy Night. O holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Saviour's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope our weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Fall on your knees, oh hear the angel voices, oh night divine, oh night when Christ was born, oh night divine, oh night divine.
Oh no! Oh, it was the baby's face. Crap. I'm so mad at myself. No, they're so cute too. Alright, damage control, damage control. Let's see if we can't get this face back. Well, I guess that makes it more realistic. Newborn babies' heads were squished with a birth canal. Dang it, I liked that face too. I'm so mad at myself. Don't do that. sort of saved. Want to see it? So frustrated. So mad at myself. Such a stupid mistake.